Like I said at the beginning, we're going to be in Luke 9 today. And I want to talk about missteps as we follow Jesus, or maybe mistakes that disciples make. And I think that even if we took a poll, even if it was anonymous or if I got everyone to raise their hands, I think everyone would say that they make mistakes as disciples, as followers of Jesus. If I asked for like a poll where you raise your hand, everyone would raise their hand because no one wants to be that guy or that girl, right? But even if it was anonymous, everyone would say, yes, I make mistakes. I make missteps. I don't always follow Jesus perfectly. I think that in my life, I've said that and thought that, and it's been true, but I haven't really thought it all the time. There have been times where I've thought, I mean, not really. I don't really make that many mistakes, or they're not that type of mistakes. I mean, I rank how much I go off track in my own head and in my own heart. And I remember being a kid and being told that was wrong, that all sin is the same. So maybe as adults, we need to realize that all missteps are the same. All mistakes are the same. If we go off track from following Jesus even just a little bit, whether it's to the left or the right, we've gone off track. And the disciples were not immune to that. They messed up. We know they messed up. Last week, we talked about Thomas. And whether you think that people are too harsh on Thomas or not, there's no denying that Thomas made a misstep. He was at one point, for a brief period of time, not believing while the rest of the disciples were believing in that upper room. In that room. I don't know if it says upper room when Thomas was with them. But when they were in the room, awaiting Jesus to reveal himself again, he was not believing while the rest were. So we know that there are people that have followed Jesus that make mistakes. But I think it's interesting, like I read from earlier, right after Jesus feeds the 5,000, right after the transfiguration, there are actually at least 5 different ways that we can see the disciples make mistakes. And it's not just mistakes as in they slip up in how they do what they're supposed to do. They make mistakes with how they're thinking and what's in their heart. So what I want to do is I want to go through these 5 different points that we can draw and 5 different examples of missteps in following Jesus, because I think that our missteps can be summed up and categorized the same as theirs. So I want to go through these things, but first I want to just, summarize what's going on. I want to get the setting of Luke 9. So if you want to start in verse 1, we're not going to read, but I want to point out some things that are going on from 1 through 36 and then skip to the end. That way we understand everything from 37 to 43 a little bit better. So first thing is that Jesus gives the 12 disciples power to heal and cast out demons in verses 1 through 6. He does this and then he sends them out on a journey. He sends them out to go to people, go to cities, go to homes, and to heal people. And so they do that. The 12 go out and they preach and proclaim the kingdom. It actually says in verse 6 of chapter 9 that they were preaching the gospel and healing everywhere. And then later on, if you look at verse 11, it says that the crowds are aware of what was going on. So as Jesus sends out the 12, they go and kind of prepare the way for Jesus in a way. This is going to be something that happens actually also in chapter 10 when he sends out the 70 or the 72, depending on your translation. But the specific thing they were talking about was the gospel, and the thing that the people were drawing near to Jesus to hear about was the kingdom of God. The disciples understand what they have is not enough because of this feeding of the 5,000. The people have been following, a big crowd has been following Jesus. And so he says, give them something to eat. And the disciples say, we don't have enough. We don't have anything, really. All we have are a couple fish and a few loaves of bread. And so they say, send the people home. Tell them to go home. And Jesus says, no, you feed them. So they have to come to this realization that what they have is not enough. But with Jesus, it's more than enough. Because after they disperse the bread and the fish, there's 12 basketfuls left over. And that's after feeding 5,000 people. You can't feed 5,000 people with 2 fish and 5 loaves of bread. I really don't care how big the fish are. You could come up with a way to say, well, the bread could be enough, but look, there's no way that 2 fish is going to be enough for 5,000 people. Not the kind of fish that they could carry and disperse, at least. So this happens, and they have this understanding that with Jesus, it is more than enough. It's confirmed to them that Jesus is the Christ. That's where we read earlier. Who do people say that I am? Some say you're John the Baptist. Some say Elijah, another prophet. But Peter says, and and Jesus himself confirms it, he is the Christ, the Son of God. But then he tells the 12 about his death, his resurrection, and what it takes to follow him. And he says it's not easy. He says you have to deny yourself, take up your cross daily, and follow him. So then after that, 8 days later, verse 28 starts, and Peter, James, and John go up with Jesus on the mountain. And he's transfigured on the mountain there. And Moses and Elijah appear. Now, how they knew it was Moses and Elijah, I don't know, and it doesn't really matter. They have that confirmed to them in some way. And this signifies not only is Jesus the Christ, but he is initiating a new covenant. He is the prophet. He is the good preacher. He is the one they need to listen to. And he will take them out of this terrible generation, out of this bondage that they are in, which is their sin. There's something they're supposed to be understanding about Jesus as they see his glory on the mountain. But only the three see this, and we assume that the rest were able to see the cloud that was on the mountain. And maybe all of them heard the voice saying, "This is my son, my chosen one, listen to him." Regardless of if they all heard it or not, I think it's safe to assume that the rest of the disciples know what happened on this mountain. And then immediately after that, after we go down and we see the interactions that we're going to be seeing, you start in verse 57 and you see that not everyone is worthy to follow Jesus. Not everyone is capable, not everyone is worthy, not everyone is willing to follow him. But Jesus invites people. 2 out of the 3 people he goes to and he says, "Follow me." One person comes to Jesus and says, "I'll follow you." But there's something that gets in the way of all of them. And that's why at the end, Jesus actually says in verse 62, "No one after putting his hand to the plow and looking back is fit for the kingdom of God." Not everyone is worthy enough to follow Jesus. Not because of their sin, but because of their desire and their commitment to following him. So these are the things that are going on at the beginning of this chapter and at the end of the chapter. Now I want to get into verse 37. Let's go ahead and read in Luke 9, beginning in verse 37, and we'll read 37 through 56. On the next day, when they came down from the mountain, a large crowd met him. And a man from the crowd shouted, saying, "Teacher, I beg you to look at my son, for he is my only boy." And the spirit seizes him, and he suddenly screams, and it throws him into a convulsion with foaming at the mouth. And only with difficulty does it leave him, mauling him as it leaves. I begged your disciples to cast it out, and they could not. And Jesus answered and said, "You unbelieving and perverted generation, how long shall I be with you and put up with you? Bring your son here." While he was still approaching, the demon slammed him to the ground and threw him into a convulsion. But Jesus rebuked the unclean spirit and healed the boy and gave him back to his father. And they were all amazed at the greatness of God. But while everyone was marveling at what he was doing, he said to his disciples, "Let these words sink into your ears, for the Son of Man is going to be delivered into the hands of men." But they did not understand this statement, and it was concealed from them, so that they would not perceive it, and they were afraid to ask him about this statement. An argument started among them as to which of them might be the greatest. But Jesus, knowing what they were thinking in their heart, took a child and stood him by his side, and said to them, "Whoever receives this child in my name receives me, and whoever receives me receives him who sent me. For the one who is least among all of you is the one that is great." John answered and said, "Master, we saw someone casting out demons in your name, and we tried to prevent him because he does not follow along with us." But Jesus said to him, "Do not hinder him, for he who is not against you is for you." When the days were approaching for his ascension, he was determined to go to Jerusalem, and he sent messengers on ahead of him, and they went and entered a village of the Samaritans to make arrangements for him. But they did not receive him because he was traveling toward Jerusalem. When his disciples, James and John, saw this, they said, "Lord, do you want us to command fire to come down from heaven and consume them?" But he turned and rebuked them and said, "You do not know what kind of spirit you are of. For the Son of Man did not come to destroy men's lives, but to save them." And they went on to another village. The reason I wanted to read all of that is there's a lot going on there. But I think it's important just to notice how quickly it transitions from one to the other. This is just as they're coming down from the mountain, and as they're going, and Jesus knows he's going to have to go to Jerusalem. These are the things that happen immediately after the transfiguration. And it's just one after the other, right? It's just like this happens, and this person says this. Jesus casts out the demon. Then they have this discussion among the disciples. He knows their hearts. And then so he corrects them, and then John's like, ooh, well, what about this? And then they go to the Samaritan village. They don't receive him. James and John are like, hey, we need to do something about this. Jesus corrects them. So it's repeatedly Jesus correcting the disciples. Now, it might only be one of them. It might just be two of them. It might be all of them. But still, we see some missteps in following Jesus. So I just want to go through these 5 things and see how we can relate to them. And then that will be the lesson for today. So the first thing is that disciples can't do godly things without God. Jesus had given the disciples the ability to heal and cast out demons at the beginning of Luke 9. Why couldn't they cast out this demon from this boy in Luke 9, 37 through 43? Well, if you go to Matthew's account, it's because they didn't have faith. And if you go to Mark's account, it's because they weren't praying. It seems to me that the disciples are not seeking God in order to do the things of God. They were supposed to be able to have this power. And you might think, well, once they had the power, they should be able to do it no matter what. If they're not leaning on God, they can't do the things of God. We can't do the things of God if we're not leaning on God either. Now, I don't expect to be able to cast out a demon. I don't expect to be able to heal someone from a physical disease. But I do expect to be able to help people with their sinful sickness. I do expect to help people, not that I can heal that or cast that out or say you're forgiven and then just move on. But if we're supposed to be helping people with their problem of sin, how can we do that without God's help? How can we do that without being godly ourselves, consulting God, without faith and without prayer? If you're trying to help someone with their spiritual disease, then you need to be praying. That's a hard lesson for me. Sometimes you get caught up in things and you think I'm doing good work, and you forget that you're not leaning on the one that empowers you to do the work. Another thing that is kind of a thing that is a godly thing that we can't do without God is we're not going to be able to go through temptation without sin, without God. If you think you can go through temptation and be perfect and be totally godly without leaning on God, you're mistaken. You can't do that. You might go through a few temptations, but just wait, your pride will catch up to you. So prayer and faith are needed for us to go through temptations without sin. We won't be able to show people godliness or the light that is of Christ or God's glory without leaning on God, without having faith in God, without prayer. Our works will mean nothing. Our works will not reflect the true glory of God. They will reflect our own glory and will be shining our light instead of the light of Christ. And that might not be seen initially, just like you might be able to go through some temptations without God initially. But the truth is, the whole phrase, the proof is in the pudding. I didn't have any pudding. We don't have pudding for Thanksgiving, but, still I think like we had sweet potato casserole. The proof is always in it, right? I don't know if that phrase works with that, but I just think like you just know it's good. Our faith will be made known. Our reliance on God will be made known throughout, even in our works. It doesn't matter if people glorify us or glorify God because of us initially. Who we are and our reliance on God and why we are showing the works that we show will be made known. Trials will overwhelm us and we will not stay faithful. We've been studying in James. Count it all joy when you enter various trials. We can endure trials and difficulties and dark days only by faith in God, only by prayer. If we don't have that, we're not going to make it through any trials. They will consume us, and we will be left where we are on our face because we've fallen. So things like purity, godliness, love, endurance, and faithfulness are impossible without God. That was something that the disciples needed to learn. That if they don't lean on God and lean on the one they're following to do the things that he has told them to do, they will not be able to accomplish it, and it's the same for us. The next thing I want to point out is that fear is not a reason to stop seeking answers. I really think this is a very interesting interaction that happens in 43 through 46, or 43 through 45, excuse me. See, everyone's marveling at what he did, and then he looks to his disciples and he says, let these words sink into your ears, okay? I want you to hear me. I want you to hear me. I want you to listen close, okay? Now, this isn't the first time that he's told them about his crucifixion, about his death. He just did it I guess maybe a week before, right before the Mount of Transfiguration, after Peter confesses it says that he is the Christ, the Son of God. Jesus says he will be taken, killed, and raised on the third day. And here he is in verse 44, saying that he's going to be delivered into the hands of men. But they don't understand it. And it says that it was concealed from them so that they would not perceive it. And I just want to make a quick point. I don't think that that means that Jesus blocked something in their brains where they could not understand what he was saying. I think what that means is they were not able to understand what he was saying because they were not listening, so therefore they couldn't connect dots. Like, if you're not going to listen the way that you need to listen and hear the things that Jesus has said, you're not going to connect the dots to understand. Like, he's given them knowledge, but they don't have understanding because they're not allowing it to connect in their own brains. And then it says they were afraid to ask him about the statement. Now, what has Jesus done that would intimidate them from asking a question? Well, really nothing in Luke 9. In fact, I would think that they would be more than willing, and they would be inclined to ask a question. They did just see him on the mountain transfigured, and maybe you're thinking, well, that would be a reason enough. They saw him, the glory of God, basically, with him on the mountain. But I think this is a misstep. I think this is a mistake for them. They're afraid to ask about this statement. They're afraid to ask questions. I want to tell you a couple of reasons that are good reasons to not ask questions about our faith. We shouldn't ask questions if it's going to be a discouragement to others and a distraction. That's a good reason to not ask questions. I don't mean like to an individual, like that you consult like a mentor or something like that. I think you can ask that person probably anything. But is it appropriate always to ask questions we have that, we're just like pondering in front of a lot of people? No, sometimes we need to shut our mouth. Sometimes we need just to realize this question is a discouragement to this young Christian. Or this question is actually going to derail my study with someone. So even though I'm studying with them and I have this question in my head, I'm not going to tell them about this. I'm going to keep going with studying what is true, what is known. Here are some good reasons that maybe we ask questions. We have a humble heart, and we really are desiring to know something from God. Ask that question. Ask the question if it's going to be something that helps us to move forward and know how we follow Jesus better. Ask a question that you know someone else is too afraid to ask, but you know they need the answer to it, even if it's something that's going to step on their toes. See, getting answers to our question takes work and humility. Getting answers sometimes means we hear things we don't want to hear again, or we don't like what it means for us. They already heard Jesus say this once. They don't want to ask again because they don't want the meaning of it. And we should be humble enough, but desire the answers enough that we will ask questions, that we will go to God, and we will go to other people that are following God for help. And when we don't want the answer, we still need to receive it. And if we don't understand it, then we should ask again. But if we're asking questions just because we don't want the answer, we don't like the answer, then we have our own heart problem. It's not the problem of the answer. So the next thing that I think we see as a misstep is that they misunderstand that the essence of discipleship is humility. You see, this is kind of this is just really funny to me. So they can't cast out the demon. Jesus corrects them. Jesus says something, they don't understand it, and then they're like, hey, who do you think the greatest is? Which one of us is the best, Which one of us is going to, he just says something about being taken away, so which one of us is going to take his place? Maybe that's what they're thinking, I don't know. But they couldn't cast out the demon, and they don't understand what he's talking about, which is a very simple statement. I'm going to be taken into the hands of people. And now they're arguing in their hearts and maybe just arguing out loud, who's going to be the greatest? So Jesus takes a child and he says, if you receive a child in my name, then you receive me. And if you receive me, you receive the Father. And then he says, the one who is the least among all of you, this is the one that is great. So the first thing we understand is that in Jesus' kingdom, in God's kingdom, greatness is not determined by the things that you would usually think it's determined by. That actually greatness is determined by humility and service. You're exalted when you humble and make yourself lowly. But I think another thing that we see from this is that we can't forget that we are learners and followers. That's what it means to be a disciple. So even if we are helping someone else learn and follow, don't forget our place, that we are learners and followers. And we need to spend time with and consider those that no one else would consider. And we need to consider those and help those that we're not going to get praised for helping. Helping a child, considering a child, was nothing for these people. It wouldn't help them in any way. But Jesus wants his followers to be so humble that they will even receive children and accept them. So the essence of discipleship is humility. And sometimes we lose sight of that. The next point that I want to, and this is kind of funny how it starts building, because as soon as he says this, then John comes up and is like, we saw someone casting out a demon, and they weren't following us with you. Should we tell them to stop? What should we do about this? This doesn't seem right. Well, didn't you just try to cast out a demon, John? And you couldn't do it. And now this other person can, and you think something's wrong with him? And who are you supposed to be following? Are you concerned with people following you, John, or are you concerned with people following Jesus? Now, there is a little bit of legitimate issue here that John has, which is that, are we sure this person is with us? Okay? Well, let's just lay out kind of the facts here. This person did something that you couldn't do. This person is doing it in the name of Jesus, giving Jesus credit and glory, and you think that this person isn't a follower of Jesus? We need to be concerned with people following Jesus and not us. Why would John think this person wasn't a disciple too? Because he didn't see him around in the moment? Because maybe he hadn't followed Jesus every step of the way? He wasn't one of the 12 maybe. Well, that doesn't mean he's not a follower. That doesn't mean he's not a disciple. Maybe another question is, and I think this would be an interesting thing if Jesus had said this. This speaks more to who Jesus is, and it speaks poorly of me that this would be my question if I was Jesus. What other power do you think he could have cast out a demon, John? That would have been my question to him. John says, we tried to stop him because he cast out demons and he wasn't following us. Oh, what other power do you believe in that he could have done that? I don't know. Like that would have just stumped him and it would have humiliated him probably. It's probably why Jesus doesn't do that. Jesus just says, don't hinder him, for he who is not against you is for you. We shouldn't think that we're the ones that draw the line of delineation of who's following Jesus. That's God that does that. Here's a few things that Jesus tells them to go by that he also tells us to go by to make this determination. Is someone doing the work and the actions in keeping with being a disciple and following Jesus? Okay, well, they're a disciple. Are they living their life in the same way that Jesus says to live their life? Then they are a disciple. Are they claiming to be doing the things that they do by the authority of Jesus, not their own or another power? Are they seeking self-exaltation, or are they seeking just to glorify God? If they're seeking to glorify God, they're doing things in his name, they're doing the things that he has said to do, they're a follower. Now, there might be some other things that we need to work through at times, but on the surface, they're a follower. And we shouldn't be the one to draw a line there and say this isn't right because he's not following us. He's not with us as we're following Jesus. We're quick to think this about people in our own town that go to different churches. We're not so quick to do this to people in other countries that are hard countries to be a follower of Jesus. If they're awful in little things, we think, oh man, but they're still trying their best to follow Jesus. But people in our own town, people that we know the churches they go to, things like that, we're like, well, I don't know. And, why? Because we don't see them on Sundays? And I don't think this is a problem necessarily for us at this church that often, but we still need to check our hearts. We need to be concerned with people following Jesus and not following us, or not following Jesus in step with us. We're just concerned with them following the steps of Jesus. And the last thing that I want to point out is that we should want salvation for people and not destruction. Okay, so Jesus has just corrected them 4 times now. Specifically, John has been involved in 1 or 2 of these things. And now, as they go to the Samaritan village, they don't receive Jesus. He's traveling towards Jerusalem, probably because they know he's going towards Jerusalem. And they're just kind of thinking, if that's where you're going, then just go on. Also, maybe he's saying something about being raised from the dead. Maybe that's something that he told them. Or maybe that's something that is being told about him, that he said that. That might have been something more concealed, but, if it is the Samaritans, that might be something they're just like, we don't understand any of this. If you want to go be with the people, you're a Jew. Why don't you just go be with the Jews, Just go ahead and go be with those people. James and John see this, and remember the tagline for them is the Sons of Thunder. And they say, Lord, do you want us to command fire to come down from heaven and consume them? What makes you think you have the power to do that? Has Jesus given you that power? And even if he did give you that power, are you going to rely on him to do that? Because you couldn't cast out the demon just maybe a couple days ago. Maybe it was the same day they couldn't cast out the demon. So they want to say, hey, they reject you, Jesus. Let's destroy him. Let's do this. Let's really show them the truth and show them who's boss. He turns and rebukes them. And he says, you don't know what kind of spirit you are of. He's saying, the heart that you have is not the heart that I have. The type of spirit that you have is not the spirit I have. What you're geared towards is not what I'm geared towards. Because, see, the Son of Man did not come to destroy, but he came to save. We should want the judgment of God to be carried out on all people, whether they are wicked or righteous. We just want God's judgment because we trust that he knows what is right. However, that is different than desiring destruction and judgment on people. We shouldn't desire that. We shouldn't desire destruction. We shouldn't be sitting here wanting, I can't wait till they get theirs. That's like personal retribution. That's retaliation and vengeance from ourselves and not for the sake of God. Not for the sake of God's justice going out into the world. But rather, we need to seek salvation for people. Jesus doesn't rebuke because they lacked faith. He doesn't rebuke them because he doesn't care that people have rejected him. This wasn't time for judgment and destruction. And we should always want salvation first because that's what Jesus wants. This is something that is similar to what we're studying in James, where we read that, in fact, I think we probably went over it Wednesday night this last week, that mercy without judgment is not something any of us desire. So therefore, we should always seek to be merciful to other people. And also, since we know that the day of the Lord will come like a thief in the night, since we know that God is waiting because his patience and his long-suffering is being shown through his delay in sending Jesus back, what is the purpose that God has for waiting to destroy this world? Salvation. He wants people to be saved. And that's what we should want as well. So, quickly, just to go over the 5 missteps, and then that'll be it for today. Disciples can't do godly things without God. That's what they learn, and that's something that we should learn. Fear is not a good reason to stop seeking answers. Fear is not a good reason for that. We should always be seeking answers from a pure heart and a humble heart. And the essence of discipleship is humility. We need to show appreciation and regard for the people who no one cares that we do that. We're not going to receive glory and honor for doing that. We need to be like a child in one way, according to Matthew 11, and we need to approach Jesus and God with humility as learners and followers. We need to be concerned with people following Jesus and not us, and we should want salvation for all people and not destruction. So I know this is really basic, but I thought this might be helpful as we kind of maybe just examine our steps as we follow Jesus. I don't care if it's during a pandemic. I don't care if it's because during an election year. I don't care if it's, heading into next year. These are things that are just true, and these are ways that we step off the path a little bit from following Jesus like we should. So I hope these things are helpful. These are just 5 things quickly that I think will be helpful. They're helpful for me to keep me in check. I'll say that. We're going to sing a song. Is it 1 song or 2 songs, Tim? 1 song. We're going to sing 1 song, and then they'll be followed by a prayer. And then we will have our class starting at 11:30 today. Thank you.